Thank you for organizing this great meeting in a great place. And so the title is a bit different, but it goes along the same line. Basically my main interest has been over the last year in understanding the function of Huntingtin protein that is mutated in Huntington disease. And what I'm going to tell you today is a story about the function of Huntingtin in linking the energy supply for axonal transport and how this impacts on neurotrophin signaling. So as you know, there is a tight link between axonal transport defects and neurodegenerative disease. For one essential reason is that axonal transport is actually occurring over very long distances. And if you think about the role, the case of the motor neuron axon, this can be up to 1 meter long. And in fact, over the last years, there have been several studies showing that, in fact, the protein themselves actually playing a role in Huntington disease, PD, or Alzheimer's disease, and even spastic paraplegia and many other disorders are actually regulating axonal transport and somehow are defective in these processes. And this is going to have a very strong impact because of the need, the requirement of this axonal transport over very long distances. One striking characteristic of all these disorders is also energy metabolism defects. There have been several studies, for example, suggesting that mitochondria are altered in many of these disorders, such as PD or HD, and that defect in ATP production could have an impact. And that's why we got very interested in understanding how this ATP loss could have an impact on the intracellular transport and especially axonal transport. As you know, axonal transport is driven by kinesin in the anterograde direction or dynein into the retrograde direction. And basically for the kinesin here, that is a movie from the Vales lab, every 8 nanometer step made by this kinesin require the hydrolysis of one ATP molecule. So if you think of one kinesin driving the transport of one vesicle, and that you need an 8 nanometer step to go from your spinal cord to the tip of your toes, you will need approximately 150 million of ATP molecules, and it will approximately take 2 weeks. Nevertheless, so one thing we've got very interested is how we come with these ATP supplies for the axonal transport. As you know, the source of energy for the brain is the glucose that is going to be processed by the glycolytic cascade, generating pyruvate. And pyruvate will be taken up by the Krebs cycle in the mitochondria, generating and then through the electron transport chain, generating this gradient of proton that will go to the ATP synthase and actually generate the final production of ATP. The glycolytic machinery is able to produce ATP, but it's much less efficient than the mitochondria because here we have the production from one glucose molecule of only 2 ATP because there is an investing phase here and a payoff phase here that at the end produce only 2 ATP. The interest of the glycolysis is also to generate the pyruvate that is going to be processed by the Krebs cycle and in a much more efficient way because we have here 34 ATP. So how can we play with the site of production of ATP or the source of ATP production into a given neuron? So one way, very simple way we started was to use iodoacetate, that is an inhibitor of the GAPDH, the glyceraldehyde phosphodeshydrogenase enzyme, or use oligomycin to block the ATP synthase here. One way to block glycolysis but not the mitochondria is just simply to add pyruvate. So you block the ATP production from the glycolysis, but the pyruvate is on the media and sufficient to activate the Krebs cycle and mitochondria ATP production. So if we go now into the neurons, We simply measure the ATP content into a given neurons, and as you can see, is that if you treat neurons with oligomycin, 5 minutes or 30 minutes, you dramatically decrease the level of ATP within your neuron, up to 80% inhibition if you block simply the mitochondrial ATP production. In contrast, if you block the glycolytic enzyme, you decrease only by 40%. So as although the inhibition of GAPDH is complete here. So as I said, most of the ATP is produced by the mitochondria. So how can we say now test the source of ATP for the axonal transport? So one way that we use is microfluidic chambers that allow to separate cell body from axons. So here we put the neurons, here for example cortical neurons, in the blue compartment here. And those neurons are going to grow their axon that will go into these little microchannels that are 4 micron width. And basically, because the length of this microchannel is longer than 500 microns, only the axon can go to this distal compartment. So if now you take movies here with a spinning confocal microscope, you will be able to follow several channels that contain, or in some cases that do not contain, axons. So you can see here at the distal, very distal part of this axon, you can see this channel. You can see an axon with vesicles. Here we use the BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, coupled to mCherry. So we can see the anterograde transport, so from the cell body to the nerve terminals, or retrograde transport back from the nerve terminals back to the cell body. And we can, using, for example, this system, we can follow up to 6 channels at a time. So some of the channels contain, for example, here 2 axons with little vesicle racing here. So with this approach, we can develop tools to follow up and quantify very accurately the transport of these vesicles. So using time projection followed by camograph, you can see that you will be able to follow very active transport here, going with a slope that is quite almost horizontal, so very fast transport. And in some cases, these vesicles are going to slow down and then stop. And from that, we can have an average transport, a distribution of velocity for all those different segments. So now let's go to the real experiment. So we go back to these microchannels. Here we have again a channel here. The cell body would be here. The nerve terminals would be here. And here we are going to follow up the transport of these BDNF vesicles. Anterogradely, they are green. If they go retrogradely, they are red. And if they stop, they are blue. So now we can block the ATP production from the mitochondria, and very surprisingly, we found that the vesicles were still moving, although we have lost almost 80% of the ATP within the neurons. So if now we block the glycolytic machinery, but we add pyruvate, so we still have production of ATP from the mitochondria, very quickly on, we observe an almost complete blockage of the axonal transport. So we did the reverse experiment by looking this time at mitochondria. Here we use MitoDS Red tracker. So MitoDS Red is electroporated into the neurons. And here you can see again the movement of this mitochondria into the axons. If we now treat these microchambers with oligomycin, you can see that very quickly on, all the mitochondria stop moving, and this is probably due to the fact that most of the ATP that actually is necessary for the movement of the mitochondria comes from the mitochondria themselves. In contrast, if you block the mitochondria, the glycolytic cascade but add pyruvate, you can see that the mitochondria are able to move. Okay, I'm not going to go into the detail because this was published in 2013. So we got interested to understand. So basically, we actually could confirm that actually silencing GAPDH with different approaches, was actually responsible for the blockage of the transport of BDNF. So as you know, GAPDH is mainly cytosolic protein. Everybody uses them for control for Western blotting, but if you now go into details about these vesicles that contain these molecular motors and that we considered as being motile vesicles, so they are able to move along microtubules. So what we did was to set up a complete purification approach to selectively purify the vesicule, a small vesicule that contain the molecular motors. And I'm not going to show you all the experiments we did because we did several Western blotting analyses and several tests. I'm not going to go into the detail, but what we could show with this approach using immunocryo-electron tomography, we could show that GAPDH, the GAPDH protein is actually selectively associated to the external face of this small vesicle. So this is cryo-EM in 3 dimensions, so you can reconstruct the vesicle, and you can see that the gold particle that selectively labeled the GAPDH molecule is actually outside the surface of this vesicle. And we could see that there is actually up to 3 GAPDH molecules per vesicle in some situation. So one way to really convince ourselves that actually GAPDH is very important and actually is really playing a role in this mechanism, and to really convince ourselves that this association is really specific, one way was to understand how GAPDH is recruited into vesicles. And we got very interested by Huntingtin protein because first of all, Huntingtin, actually we and others have shown that Huntingtin was very important to regulate axonal transport by interacting with the molecular motors and mainly dynein here, but also because one of the interactors for Huntingtin that was one of the first interactors to be discovered was actually GAPDH. So we simply took neurons and basically silenced those neurons and analyzed the localization of Huntingtin, BDNF, and GAPDH. And you can see in a Z slicing of an axon, you can see that Huntingtin here localized on BDNF vesicles, and it also localized with GAPDH. And now if we silence Huntingtin into those neurons, you can see that you still are able to detect this BDNF vesicle, but you see a detachment of GAPDH. So we confirmed this experiment in vivo by crossing Huntington flux mice to inducible Cre mice to delete selectively Huntingtin in the forebrain, because we had to do this because Huntingtin knockout is actually embryonic lethal, so you have to do it. The only way to remove Huntingtin is to remove it in the adult. And we performed again subcellular fractionation to selectively purify enriched on the P3 vesicle fraction, so the small vesicle. And you can see in this situation that on those vesicles, here the CAMK are the one that in which Huntingtin has been removed, and you can see that there is a reduction of Huntingtin here in the cytosol that is dramatic in the P3 fraction and the vesicular fraction. And if now you look at the level of GAPDH on the vesicle, you can see that this level is reduced compared to the control situation. So both in vitro and in vivo, if we remove Huntingtin, we actually detach GAPDH from the vesicles. So does it make any sense to have GAPDH on vesicles? So one thing we did was to go back to our enrichment of this vesicular fraction that contained the motile vesicles, and we measure GAPDH activity. And indeed, those vesicles these purified vesicles actually possess a GAPDH activity, and this is due to the presence of GAPDH enzyme on the vesicles. And this can be blocked by iodoacetate. But more interestingly, if now you take a substrate of the glycolytic cascade, GAP and all the ADP and the molecule, you are able to produce ATP. So seems that this motile vesicle have the capacity to produce ATP. So we therefore ask whether the vesicular GAPDH is actually sufficient to propel the vesicle in axon. And to do this experiment, what we did was to remove GAPDH into the neurons by silencing. So then in this situation, what you observe is a decrease of both the anterograde and the retrograde transport of BDNF, again, here into these axons. what we next did was to re-express a GAPDH that is strictly vesicular. So how we did that? We took a GAPDH that we fused to the transmembrane domain of synaptotagmin 1. And it's also fused to GFP. So then in this situation, the GAPDH is not in the cytosol, but it's strictly on the vesicles. And you can see here it's perfectly colocalized with BDNF M-cherry vesicles. So then, if we re-express this TM-GAPDH that localize only in the vesicles, and we have removed the endogenous cytosolic GAPDH, then what you observe is a recovery of the axonal transport, both in the anterograde and the retrograde direction. So and this is strictly due to the catalytic activity of GAPDH, because if you now replace the cytosolic GAPDH by a strictly vesicular form of GAPDH, but that lacks the catalytic, the cysteine 149, so that is catalytically inactive, it's unable to rescue the transport. So if we want to push the vesicular transport of vesicule in neurons, you can do that by increasing the stoichiometry of the vesicular GAPDH into the neurons. One of the important questions was that, is vesicular GAPDH really required to this vesicular transport, to this axonal transport? So one way to do that would be to selectively, to have a lot of GAPDH into the cytosol, but not on the vesicle. And that way, we could show that, we could demonstrate that indeed we can have a situation where we have GAPDH in the cytosol, but it is not attached to the vesicle, and therefore it's not able to transport the vesicle. How can we do that? Well, I just show you that one of the molecules that maintain GAPDH on the vesicle is actually Huntingtin protein. And indeed, if you remove Huntingtin by silencing here by 2 different siRNA, you can see that it does not affect the level of GAPDH into those neurons, but actually detach GAPDH from the vesicle. And by doing that, what we observe is a reduction of both the anterograde and the retrograde transport of BDNF. And if now we re-express TM-GAPDH into the neurons, we rescue the transport both in the anterograde and the retrograde direction. So what we have shown here is that basically GAPDH localize on vesicles and provide energy for fast axonal transport, and that Huntingtin actually could have a major role by scaffolding GAPDH on this vesicle. And I didn't have time to show you, but this mechanism is conserved. We could show that this is true also in flies. And this mechanism might be general because we also found that other cargos, such as amyloid precursor protein, synaptotagmin, or the BDNF receptors TrkB, are also depends on the level of GAPDH attached to the vesicles. So we are very happy, but basically one major problem is that GAPDH does not produce ATP, if you remember your biochemistry courses. And the second is that can we really be demonstrative about the fact that our vesicles can be autonomous? Indeed, can they produce themselves energy and propel, and self-propel? How can we do that? Well, we went back to this protocol of purification and subjected actually this, the content of this protein into mass spectrometry. And we could show that indeed this fraction actually is very enriched into a vesicle that was defined as synaptic vesicle or secretory vesicle. Very interestingly, what we find, all the proteins, 1291, were actually ranked upon intensity. And what you can see is that most of the proteins that are attached to these vesicles are actually molecular motors. There are many markers of non-vesicular proteins, such as synaptophysin, synaptojanine, but there are also a lot of RABs, and this is for James, lots of RAB that are also associated with this vesicular fraction. So very interestingly, when we looked at the glycolytic enzyme, we could show that the whole glycolytic machinery can be found on this protein, and especially we were very interested in one, the phosphoglycerate kinase and the pyruvate kinase, that are actually the 2 kinases of the payoff phase that are actually producing ATP. And you can see here the IP showing the presence of all the components of the glycolytic cascade that are actually present in the specific IP fraction and not in the control fraction. And very interestingly, this confirms many other studies that also find some of the glycolytic enzyme on the vesicles, but actually people were kind of always referring that as possible contaminants. So to really be convinced about the presence of the whole glycolytic cascade on vesicles, actually we performed confocal microscopy followed by super resolution microscopy. Here this storm showing that indeed for all except one, actually we could confirm that, for example, PFK, GAPDH, PGM, aldolase, PGK, enolase, and PK are actually enriched on vesicle here as shown by super resolution microscopy. So there is only one that we could not confirm because of the lack of very good good antibodies. So okay, we have all the glycolytic enzyme on the vesicles, but now the question are all these enzymes required to sustain fat. So we show previously that silencing of GAPDH actually can block or reduce the axonal transport. What's about some other enzyme? So we haven't done it for all the enzymes, but we basically try to see whether the last, inhibiting the last step of the payoff phase, so pyruvate kinase, actually is sufficient to block axonal transport. And you can see here using 3 different siRNA targeting pyruvate kinase, we can reduce the anterograde and the retrograde transport of BDNF into cortical neurons. Now, another experiment we did was that can we restore or bypass some of this enzyme? And so one way was to silence GAPDH. So we know it's going to reduce, we know it's going to reduce the fast axonal transport of BDNF vesicle. And now can we add the substrate of the last step, so the step of the pyruvate kinase, so adding phosphoenol pyruvate, magnesium, and ADP. And if you do that, basically, you can rescue the transport induced by the silencing of GAPDH. So silencing GAPDH reduces the transport here that can be rescued by adding the substrate of the last step of the glycolytic cascade. So now can we really show that the vesicles are autonomous for this transport? So for that, we will need to reconstitute a pure in vitro system using the vesicles that have been purified. So one way was to develop a system with a flow chamber. So we have here glass slides in which we attach antibody against tubulin. So these antibodies are going to stabilize a microtubule that we will polymerize in vitro. And then the idea is to add the fraction of this motile vesicle that we have purified, and that contain only the vesicle that contain the molecular motors as we have been able to purify, and that also contain the glycolytic enzyme. And so if we do that, one way that has been, this type of experiment are quite tricky, but this has been done by others, showing that, of course, if you don't add any ATP, the vesicles are not going to move. You need a certain level of ATP to make the vesicle moving. And indeed, if you add 1 millimolar ATP, your vesicle is going to move. So now the deal was to add ADP and PEP and to see whether these vesicles are able to move. And you can see that we are able, by just adding ADP and the phosphoenol pyruvate as a substrate of the last step of the glycolytic enzyme, to produce ATP and being able to sufficient to make the vesicles moving. And I don't have the time to show you the control, but we could show that this is phosphatase. This can be blocked by phosphatase. So this is ATP dependent. This is DNA independent, and indicating that this transport is actually that the vesicles are able to self-propel in vitro. So I told you that Huntingtin was scaffolding GAPDH. So one question, does Huntingtin scaffold all the glycolytic enzyme? And so that would make a lot for Huntingtin. But in fact, Huntingtin is quite a very interesting protein, quite potent. And indeed, in fact, at least 6 of the enzymes of the glycolytic cascade were found to interact with Huntingtin either directly or indirectly, according to all these different papers looking for yeast hybrid or interactome for Huntingtin. So suggesting that Huntingtin could actually scaffold the whole glycolytic machinery on the neurons. So how does it relate to Huntington disease? Well, Huntington disease is an autosomal dominant neurodegenerative disorder we heard this morning that by Alexandra that it is characterized by personality changes, involuntary coriform movements, and cognitive decline and dementia, and it is characterized by the loss of neurons within the striatum and also in the cortex. And the mutation is this CAG expansion in the Huntingtin protein. Over the last year, we have shown that Huntingtin plays a very important role, as I already told you, plays a very important role in transporting actually vesicles that contain the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And why this is important is because actually the striatum require BDNF for its survival. And the BDNF is only produced by the corticostriatal connections, the afferences, from the cortex to the striatum. What we found is in the disease situation, when Huntingtin contains the polyQ expansion, there is a loss of a reduced attachment of this complex to the microtubule, and this results in a reduction of this transport of the vesicle, the BDNF vesicle, along the microtubule. And this will have an effect by reducing the level of the BDNF release from this corticostriatal connection, and therefore a reduction in the BDNF trophic support to the striatum. I show you that, so very interestingly, is that Huntingtin is present in the cortex, but it's also present in the striatum. And here, if we zoom into a corticostriatal connection, what we would have is that Huntingtin participates to the transport of BDNF here. BDNF is going to be released, will act on the TrkB receptor at the postsynaptic striatal dendrites. And upon activation, TrkB will be endocytosed, internalized, and then transport as a signaling endosome back to the nucleus and will signal at the striatal neurons to produce a neurotrophic response and the survival signals. So I showed you in the first part of my talk the use of microfluidic that allows us to separate cell body from an axon to the axon terminals. Now we develop other microfluidic chambers that allow us to separate the cell body here of the striatal neurons from their dendrite terminals. And by playing with the length of this micro channel, which in this case is going to be around 100 micron, and playing also with molecules such as polydylysine laminin. And you can see here what we did was to have the neurons extending their dendrites into, so the striatal neurons are plated here, and the dendrites are going to pass into these microchannels. And here what we add is a BDNF coupled to quantum dot, and then we let the BDNF to be internalized, and then after 2 minutes we reveal the retrograde movement of these BDNF TrkB vesicles using quantum dot coupled to streptavidin. And you can see here that, I don't know if you see them well, but you can see here like little green dots corresponding to the movement of the signaling endosome that went back to the nucleus of these various striatal neurons. If now you do the same experiment using neurons from the Huntington disease mice, in fact these are mice knocking for the mutation, they contain the exact same genetic mutation, so it's not a transgenic, it's an insertion of a polyglutamine stretch into the mouse Huntingtin gene, and in this situation you can see that most of these little Q dots remain in the dendrite terminal, so suggesting an impairment of the retrograde transport here. How does it impact in terms of the survival? If now we do the same experiment using this microchamber, wild-type situation, mutant situation, here this is the control, here we add the BDNF and then we wait 10 minutes or 1 hour, and here we are going to look at phospho-ERK or CFOS induction. You can see if you add BDNF in the control situation, you have a massive increase in the phosphorylation of ERK here in the in the striatal compartment, and this is here this is the mutant. So you can see here that the mutant, this is much reduced compared to the control situation. If you do the same thing for CFOS at 1 hour, again you see some striatal neurons that are going to induce the transcription of CFOS, and this is much reduced in the disease situation. Here you can see the quantification. So the idea is basically that not only we have here a situation in which the cortical neuron that project to the striatoms are transporting BDNF, and this depends on huntingtin protein. Huntingtin plays also a very important role in mediating the retrograde signaling of TrkB receptor from the dendrite terminals of the striatal neurons back to the nucleus, where they are going to signal, and this is impaired in the disease situation. So now I will conclude. I hope I convince you that the vesicular glycolysis actually provides onboard energy for fast axonal transport, and in fact we show now using a totally reconstituted in vitro system that vesicles are actually able to self-propel in absence of ADP, so these are micro machines, and totally independent, and that huntingtin plays a very important role not only for scaffolding the molecular motors, but also the whole glycolytic machinery on those vesicles. And by this, actually, we believe that huntingtin plays a very important role in coupling energy production to consumption, and so which probably provides a very interesting way of regulation, because as long as the molecular motors are functioning, then you will need ATP production. If the molecular motors stop, then you can have a way to regulate this ATP production on site. And that by this mechanism, by transporting both BDNF and its receptor, huntingtin plays therefore a very important role in regulating neurotrophin signaling, and that this transport and this signaling is altered in disease. I would like to thank the people that have been involved in this work, and especially Diana Zala, Géraldine Liu, and more recently Victoria Enkelman for all this mass spec. This work was done we benefited from many collaborations. I just want to cite Christian Niage and Bernard Oflac for the mass spec, Daniel Choquet for the STORM. I would like also to mention long-standing collaboration with the Humberts Lab, and thank also the funding, and this is Grenoble. Thank you very much for your attention.